You've probably heard the name Millard Fillmore, right? But for most of us, that's kind of where it stops. He's the 13th president, and he just fades into the background of American history. But here's the thing. He took the reins right when the country was about to completely implode. The choices he made didn't just fade away. They set off shockwaves that left him with a legacy as one of our most controversial and, yeah, most forgotten leaders.
Hey, it's not just us today. Way back in 1907, a historian named Frank Severance basically said we've always gotten Fillmore's story wrong. He argued Fillmore wasn't just forgotten, but actively, maligned and misrepresented. That's pretty strong language.
So what happened? How does a person who holds the most powerful office in the country end up as little more than a trivia question? To figure that out, we've got to put ourselves in his shoes, right at the moment he was handed a nation that was on the absolute brink of collapse.
To get Fillmore, you first have to understand the sheer chaos of the year 1850. The United States wasn't just divided, it was a powder keg with a lit fuse.
And the crazy thing is, this all happened in the blink of an eye. Gold is discovered and boom, California is flooded with people, which forces the question of statehood. The sitting president, Zachary Taylor, makes a really bold move. Just bring California in as a free state, period. The South goes ballistic. And then, right in the middle of this absolute firestorm, Taylor dies, suddenly. And just like that, Vice President Millard Fillmore is now in charge of a nation that is ready to explode.
So Fillmore doesn't just inherit an office. He inherits a political minefield. You've got California's status, which threatened the entire balance of power. You have Texas literally threatening to invade New Mexico over a border dispute. You've got the ugly sight of slave auctions happening in the nation's capital, which is a huge international embarrassment. And simmering under all of it, the South is demanding a much stronger federal law to hunt down and recapture escaped slaves. Seriously, any one of these issues could have started the Civil War right then and there.
So with the country basically burning down around him, Fillmore makes a choice. He throws all his weight behind a massive, super controversial package of laws designed to fix everything at once. This would become his defining act, the Compromise of 1850.
Think of it like a giant, high-stakes political deal. The North gets two huge wins. California comes in as a free state, and the slave trade in D.C. is shut down. The South, in return, gets the possibility of new slave states in New Mexico and Utah. The settlers there would get to vote on it. But the biggest thing they get, the thing they demanded, was a brand new, much more powerful fugitive slave law. It was this grand bargain designed to give just enough to each side to get them to step back from the brink.
But that last piece, that was the poison pill. This new fugitive slave law forced the issue of slavery into every single town in the North. It made regular people legally responsible for helping catch escaped slaves. It denied the accused any real legal rights, and it basically put a bounty on their heads. For people in the North, this was just a profound moral outrage.
So you have to ask, right, why on earth would Fillmore sign something so toxic? Well, in his mind, it was all about duty. He saw himself as a pragmatist, not a crusader. He actually wrote that a leader has to be willing to offer himself upon the altar of his country. For him, that meant making this incredibly ugly choice to save the Union. He was genuinely convinced that if this whole compromise failed, the nation was done for.
And this right here, this really gets to the heart of the tragedy of Millard Fillmore's presidency. Because let's be clear, in the short term, the compromise worked. It was actually a stunning success. It pushed off the Civil War for 10 years, and that decade was absolutely crucial. It gave the North's industrial economy vital time to grow, making it way more powerful when war finally did come. But the long-term cost? Oh, it was catastrophic. The fugitive slave law created a firestorm, the fighting over it literally blew up his own political party, and it completely destroyed his reputation for good.
So his reputation is in tatters, his party is collapsing all around him, Fillmore is out of the White House and basically politically homeless. He needs a new way back in. And the path he chose would seal his fate in the history books, and boy did he choose poorly.
He decided to join the American Party, but you probably know them by their infamous nickname, the Know-Nothings. This was a movement fueled by fear and hatred of the waves of Irish and German immigrants coming to America, many of whom were Catholic. Their whole platform was basically about restricting the rights of foreigners to preserve a Protestant-led America.
With his old party, the Whigs, totally dead, Fillmore gambled. He thought maybe this nativist movement could become a new national party, one that could unite Americans on issues other than slavery. So he accepted their presidential nomination for the 1856 election, hoping he could ride this wave right back into the White House.
So how'd that gamble pay off? Yeah, not so well. As you can see from the results, he got crushed. He finished a distant third and only managed to win a single state, Maryland.
His big attempt to build a new political home was a total failure, and his alliance with the xenophobic party was a political dead end.
Okay, so let's bring it all back home to our original question. His presidency was defined by a toxic compromise, and his career after that was defined by a failed nativist campaign. So how did history ultimately judge Millard Fillmore?
When you boil it all down, his terrible reputation really comes from a toxic three-part cocktail. First, signing the fugitive slave law made him a villain in the great moral story of abolition. Second, his run with the Know-Nothings permanently stained him as being on the wrong side of the American immigrant story. And the final nail in the coffin, he never wrote his memoirs. He never told his side of the story. He just let his enemies and critics define his legacy for him. And trust me, they did not hold back.
But hold on, there's one last piece to this whole puzzle that I found absolutely fascinating. It's just a single number, but it adds a whole new layer of complexity to the story. And that number is 332.
That's it. That is the total number of times the fugitive slave law was actually used in the entire decade it was on the books. It's a remarkably small number. So what does that tell us? It tells us the law's real power wasn't in its day-to-day enforcement, it was in its symbolism. It was a moral declaration that absolutely enraged the North and hardened the battle lines, making the Civil War pretty much inevitable.
So in the end, how are we supposed to see this guy? Was he a pragmatist who made a terrible choice just to buy the nation a few more years of life? Or was he a leader whose moral compromises were so deep that he was always destined to end up on the wrong side of history? It's a really tough question, and it gets to the very heart of what we expect from our leaders in a crisis, and that is the complex and ultimately tragic legacy of the forgotten president.